That was an awesome start, Sina. Thank you very much. Happy International Workers' Day to all of our listeners out there, and welcome to our special May Day podcast. It is special because we have an on the ground correspondent from the May Day protests in New York City calling in. But before I ask Karina to come up, I'd like to introduce our other guests today. First, we have ACE co-founder and avid podcaster Jemima Pierre. Jemima, do you want to say hi?
Hi, everyone. Happy May Day.
Then we have Brahim Ruaba, who is a dear friend of the podcast and of ACE as well.
Happy May Day, everyone.
We have an absent member, Peter Hudson, who is on his way. He was busy doing very important things, and hopefully he will make it. If he doesn't, then he's going to have to replace this session with an additional 5 podcasts over the summer while the rest of us are unavailable. We'll let you know about that later. So welcome, everybody. Today we're actually going to discuss imperialism and how it's still the primary contradiction. We wanted to highlight that specifically on May Day, and especially after the recent round of debates on social media over the relationship or non-relationship between white supremacy and capitalism. Our position as ACE is that imperialism is still and always the primary contradiction until victory. And we'll explain later. But before we do that, I want to introduce Karina Mullen, ACE co-founder, and she's actually also an organizer and a scholar, and she's at the May Day protests that are about to start, I think, in New York City. Do you want to say hi, Karina?
Hi, comrades, and greetings from Washington Square Park. It's a little bit loud here, and this is my first time doing this, and certainly my first time using a selfie stick. So apologies for any technical issues that may arise. But I'm really excited to be here with you all, and happy May Day.
You're doing great. I love the Palestine flag in the background. Yeah. So do you want to start us out by talking about, the relationship between U.S. labor and U.S. imperialism? Are you at an anti-imperialist protest, or do you want to be?
Hey, thanks for that. Great question. Yeah, so today at 5 p.m. there's going to be the main Labor Day march that is starting here from Washington Square Park.
Oh, you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, so I was just saying that right now I'm at a pre-May Day rally that's organized by Labor for Palestine, along with several locals, unions, and caucuses, Palestine, anti-imperialist, anti-war caucuses, and community organizations. And this is the site of where, this is where the main rally, Labor Day rally, is going to be, and the march is going to leave from here later on at 4, I believe at 4 p.m. So this is the pre-May Day rally. And what we're trying to do here is bring in anti-imperialist voices. And that's, not to say that there won't be at the main rally as well, but we know historically trade unions in this country have been, especially the big ones, have been quite conservative and also, supportive of imperialist policies. The AFL-CIO, which I'm sure many of the speeches that will be coming up at our Speak Out will point out, has, for example, been complicit with labor Zionism, labor imperialism for years, supporting through the purchase of, billions in Israeli bonds, through financial support, through support for U.S. Military aid and the sale of weapons to the Zionist entity, has really supported Zionist settler colonialism and the super exploitation and dispossession of the Palestinian workers.
Mhm.
So, that's going to be a major theme here. Now, what's good I want to point out is that even the AFL-CIO and the big unions today are all sort of backing May Day, and this is new. This goes back to the Haymarket, and I'm sure there'll be more about this protest and massacre in the late 1800s. Where we had martyrs really who died for the 8-hour workday. And it has historically not been major trade unions in this country haven't celebrated May Day. So it's important that it's starting to happen. Certainly the strike in Minnesota that happened a couple of months ago after the ICE killings helped to advance that support for May Day and for discussions around a general strike. But historically, as I said, trade unions in this country haven't been either for militant class struggle here. There's a history of racism in the trade union movement here, leaving out Black and brown and indigenous workers, and of course supporting imperialist policy, therefore undermining trade unions, global South workers, undermining their ability to socially reproduce, because of course that's what wars do, and of course kill workers. They make it easier to exploit, to steal their resources, to continue the primitive accumulation that even Marx noted and talked about. And of course, I know there will be a discussion later on in this in this podcast about all of the scholars from Eric Williams to Walter Rodney and also present company, all the scholars here and in ACE who have talked about the ongoing primitive accumulation and exploitation and oppression of global South workers and racialized workers here in the belly of the beast. So that's what this rally is going to bring attention to, and point out that workers, if they really want to be, the idea that an attack on one is an attack on all, which is the basis of trade unionism, that if we really stand behind that, we really want to support workers, we need to oppose imperialist wars, we need to impose settler colonialism, genocide, and we need to stand with the resistance, because it's the workers who are fighting back from Palestine to Iran, to Lebanon, to Haiti, to Cuba. That anti-imperialist resistance is workers' resistance. If we want to stand with workers globally, we stand with the resistance. Thank you. Sorry if I can't hear well.
No, thank you, Karina. Do you have time for can you stay on for a little bit longer for interviews or another question, or do you need to run?
Yeah, I can, and I'm gonna reach out to some folks in the back if you want me to. I've already talked to some comrades here about interviews, so if you want me to set that up now, I can do that as well.
Yeah, why don't you do that? Well, and then I'll ask, we'll continue the discussion while you do that. Thank you. And please don't forget to push the like button on YouTube and go to the Anti-Imperialist Scholars Collective page on YouTube. We also have a website, antiimperialist.com, where you can sign up for our monthly newsletter, our weekly newsletter. And then we're also on social media at Pen and Machete. My pen is my machete, I think, or at Pen and Machete. So let's get started with the discussion while Karina goes and finds our other guests. So there, on social media, or I think over really not this past week, but the weeks before, there was this raging debate, which is not a new debate. It's actually an old debate. I would say mostly in the US and Europe, or in North America and Europe, about the relationship between white supremacy and capitalism. If I were to be frank, I would say that the debate read as racist, quite frankly, and it often does, even if that's not the intention of the debaters, because there's a racial anxiety that's present in these debates about who's taking what from whom. There was that undertone was present for sure. So I wanted to just open up the discussion, to talk about why this debate is happening. How do you, Jemima, maybe you can start us out. How do you, in your work and in your scholarship and your activism, think about the relationship between white supremacy and capitalism? And what does the view, our view that imperialism is the primary contradiction in the world today, how does that shape your analysis?
Thanks, Nina. Hi, everyone. Also, we're supposed to say that the people watching on the East is a podcast to join ACE.
Yes.
So I just thought thank you, Sina. Yeah, so it's interesting. We're calling it the debate between white supremacy and capitalism, but it's really a debate, a race versus class debate that shows up here and there all the time. That's how people refer to it, right? And a dismissal of people who are considered racial essentialists by bringing up race. And so what we wanted to do is reframe it and to talk about white supremacy. And I think one of the best things to do is actually bypass this debate. And I wanted to begin because I did pull up this wonderful quote by Walter Rodney, who stated that since World War One, which we should actually call a European Civil War, he said at that point from World War One, everywhere in the world, white people held power in all its aspects: political, economic, military, and even cultural. The essence of white power is that it is exercised over non-white peoples, whether or not they are minority or majority, whether it was a country belonging originally to whites or to non-whites. And so part of that is to think about how the current international power system emerged in the 15th century through violent conquest, colonization, the universal legitimacy of European, which later became racialized white power. And they did that through the emergence of racial science, and so on. So the third world nation people are part of a global economy that is dominated by white capital, white international lending institutions, as well as Western intellectual, political, and juridical traditions. And we see this all over the place, right? In terms of thinking about these institutions that make rules, right? The rules-based international order, the United Nations, the World Trade Organization. All of this is really part of that European white supremacist system. And one of the things that we have to think about is we haven't done enough to name whiteness as the original identity politics that has actually ruled the world. And I think, the best person who talks about this a lot is Gerald Horne, who always makes sure to point out there's class collaboration among the whites. And we have to actually point to this because, if we sit here and we say, if so we bypass the race versus class discussion to talk about how race and class work together through white supremacy. And we actually have to historicize the current world order as an establishment of race, as constructing race, right? And then establishing this order where those who are racialized as white control all the means, right? And so even those who are non-white are working through those who have access to part of the white power system. We're all still working through a white power system. And so my work really talks about white supremacy in the sense that brings into white supremacy's emerges through the capitalist system, through the racialization of slavery, the establishment of colonial, the imperialism, establishment of colonial rule over the vast majority of the planet, and the structure that we still live within. And so that's how I think we should approach this, because what we get caught up in, and I do think what's happening right now, there's a backlash against and Gerald Horne has been great, and I hope everybody finds him this about identity politics, and I'm going to shift to that just quickly, because identity politics and so-called wokeism is something that's being used even by the so-called left in the northern countries, right? In the white supremacist settler colonial countries such as the US, Canada, and so on, right? And part of that is to actually assume that when people talk about whiteness, when people talk about white supremacy, people only focus on representations, cultural positions, as opposed to structures, economic and political structures of power. And so even the people who take the time to have materialist analysis, they really flop when it comes to thinking about the ways that race actually works in the system, or how race and racialization was created through the system of capitalist exploitation, created through the system and perpetuated through the system of imperialism. For example, we could not, I remember when the special military operation began in 2022, and the news media was talking about how devastated they were to see white people, Ukrainian, dying. And I remember the conversation with news media. I think, I was looking for some quotes the other day, because I had to write them down because I was just so shocked. Somebody said, they said, these people, these are not refugees we are used to. These people are Europeans. And then there's the deputy general prosecutor of Ukraine said, it's very emotional for me because I see European people with blonde hair and blue eyes being killed. And someone else said, this isn't a place like Iraq or Afghanistan. This was a CBS correspondent. He said, this isn't a place like Iraq or Afghanistan that has seen conflict raging for decades. This is a civilized, relatively European city. So when we think about the response to Ukraine, right? Some Ukrainians dying, to the fact that we've watched 2 years of a genocide against racialized, non-white Palestinian people, Lebanese people, and Iranian people, right? We've watched this, and we could not, if the world was not structured to white supremacy, this would not be allowed. It would not be allowed for you to kill, people say 200,000 Palestinians, or for you to bomb 100 places in 10 minutes and kill, how many people in Lebanon, or for you to bomb Somalia every day for the past 10 years, right? And so I do think, so when this so-called fight gets on, we actually have to point to the fact that US imperialism is a white supremacist structure that actually focuses on the identity politics of whiteness and white power. And if we do that, then we can actually bypass those debates, and we can see them for what they are, as debates that actually don't take into account the long history of European hegemony on the planet.
Thank you, Jemima. Brahim, I want to bring you in. What do you think? Do you remember the question?
Kind of, yeah. And but it's hard to think, to think what to add to what Jemima just said. I totally agree, and I think I myself don't have any definitive kind of answer about how to think about it. But the way that I've been thinking about it is that there is this idea, at least, that people who identify as being on the left, right, think about race as sort of an ideological justification for certain sort of labor regimes that sort of accompany the European expansion into the rest of the world, and what have you. And this, but then if there is agreement about that, then sort of put in the work of people like Cedric Robinson as a straw man, or as a representative of this idea of racial capitalism. And then sort of the arguments are all about assumed to be the people who foreground race, or give race some explanatory power. Then it's not, their arguments are not being taken in their own right, but they are being taken as stand-in for what Cedric Robinson's positions about communism or what have you were. So most of these people seem to me, at least, and maybe I'm misunderstanding, but seem to me to be talking past each other, and there's more to like defining sort of the parameters of the debate or the conversation, if a debate ought to be taking place about this at all. Then at least get sort of on the same, define the terms that that are being debated before entering into that discussion. So I don't think there is. If one then starts from the point that race is not only an ideological construct that justifies, but actually over time it congeals into materiality. It attains, because sort of, even if we kind of agree that it started with the colonialism, enslavement and what have you, it has congealed, and now it has a certain materiality in the sense that one cannot really talk about economic structures or class without talking about race, or at least thinking them together at the same time. That's not to take away from the explanatory power of class, but to say that classes there are raced classes and racialized, raced classes and classed races in some ways, in the way that someone like Fanon talked about in the settler colony, that you're white because you're rich, and you're rich because you're white. It's you know, it's not. These are not two separate tracks, and one of them sort of going down the race kind of route. It is true, it has its the shortcomings, that in the sense that it could be weaponized with identity politics and not bring in. There is that potential. We're not denying that, but also to just say race is a secondary contradiction to the class contradiction, then that misses a lot. That sort of framework, I think, misses a lot of the picture and the processes and dynamics that are at play. Now, just to maybe add to that, I was reading Malik Ben Nabi, an Algerian sort of third wordist thinker from the 50s, who was writing about right after the Bandung and this Afro-Asian idea, and he wrote an article in which he argued that there is what he called a colonial coefficient. And if you think about, like, thinking in the context of Algeria and the conquest of Algeria, when you have someone like de Tocqueville, who was writing about during the time of the conquest, and he points out in the 1830s and 40s, he points out that, you know, levels of literacy in Algeria were much higher than those in France. You know, among women, among men, health conditions, life expectancy, all of these social and developmental indicators or indexes were better in Algeria. Now, after the conquest and 4 decades of scorched earth policy and genocidal colonial violence, right? The primitive accumulation that was taking place. Of course, you're going to create a destruction, the sort of the scholasticide that came with it, the destroying institution, you know, educational institutions and what have you. You're going to create a colonized population that has higher levels of say illiteracy and so on. So the soldiers, the French soldiers who came in and officers who came in the 30s and 40s, they still had kind of a certain level of respect to the adversary, to the colonized, to the Algerians. Those who came in the 1870s and 1880s, they came, and the discourses, the racist discourses that were once hard to reconcile with the material reality on the ground became sort of self-fulfilling prophecies, that these people are actually brutes and they are ignorant and they don't know, and because you have created, and that's what he calls, what Malik bin Nabi calls the colonial coefficient, in the sense that that kind of racist, orientalist kind of the discourse, once it's metabolized through the dialectic with the material colonial capitalist primitive accumulation for a certain period of time, then it congeals into, it becomes, it gains materiality and it becomes part of the new material reality. So that is again just all to say. I'm not sure if there is any value in dismissing sort of the frameworks of analysis that take into consideration race and center race with class, and just sort of focus on the mere focus on class just leaves it, or leaves the picture incomplete. Yeah.
Thank you both very much. Sina, should we bring Karina back in, or should we wait a little bit? Karina, are you there? No, we lost her.
She kind of
Okay.
keeps popping in and out. I think she's
Okay.
having maybe some connection issues, but I'll text her and we'll see. But keep going.
Okay, sounds good. So this was a great. Oh, there. I think she's coming back. Are you there, Karina? Welcome back, Karina. You're on mute. Hi, Karina. Hello.
Hi. Oh, hi, comrades. I'm just going to try. Sorry, because I don't hear very well. But were you asking for an Did you want to see if I could get an interview now?
Sure, that works.
Sorry. Yes.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Okay. I just wanted to say that as I'm looking for someone, in terms of the discussion, I also wanted to raise that, thinking about class compromise, and sorry, I cut out at various points, but I heard what Jemima was saying about Gerald Horn, and that made me think of the labor aristocracy, and really, how a portion, as Marx and Lenin talked about, of the labor in the global north has benefited from the exploitation, the super exploitation, the drain of surplus value from racialized workers. And I think that's a really important point, because when we try and understand why our unions don't come out and strike when there's a genocide against the Palestinian people, don't come out and do pickets when the U.S. is, and in fact, workers here are even participating in producing the weapons that are bombing Iran or Lebanon. We have to understand it from that context as well, through the lens of white supremacy. So I'm really glad. I just wanted to say that you foregrounded white supremacy in this discussion, and thinking about how it shapes capital accumulation in the imperialist core. So I have someone. Just give me one second, and I'm gonna grab her.
Okay. Well, while we wait quickly, so do you? I guess I'm just going to be frank. Do you believe do you take seriously the fact the refusal of so many to consider this relationship? Or do you think it's disingenuous? Or do you think it's a sort of a cycle that repeats itself and then becomes, honest?
Right. I think this is when I wish Peter was here, because this is not this is not this is a cycle that repeats itself. Um but what's also historically accurate, actually, has been the refusal of a lot of the white socialists, or Marxists, to actually take race and white supremacy into account, and that's
Yeah.
been going back for a long time. In fact, I was reading Charles Mills, the philosopher, who actually one of the first people to actually theorize global white supremacy. In one of his books, he has this epigraph, and I wanted to read it to you and to tell you. And this is a quote from an African American activist from 1930s, where he says, "Even after a revolution, the country will still be full of crackers." Right. And what he means by that is that we can have the socialist revolution, and there would still be white supremacy, in the sense, if you don't if it based on the way that they conceive of socialist revolution. Now, if we when we get to socialism, we shouldn't have to actually deal with white supremacy, right? But the point of that quote, the joke about that, is to to we do still have the people who don't understand race, who don't take the time to theorize race, and who see it as a category, as opposed to a process, as opposed to a process of racialization, how people are racialized based on material realities, economic, political, and otherwise. And so, because there's the inability to understand how race formation works, how racialization works, how white supremacy is key, right? Because of that refusal to acknowledge whiteness and white class collaboration, I can see them really believing that, right? Because that's why you still have this dismissal of identity politics. And when we say identity politics, they're really talking about, like, the Obamas, right? Oh, you have
Mhm.
you had a black male president, and all the black people, it's like, black people are in charge. It's representational, no politics, and so everybody's okay. And this is the neoliberal representational politics that actually doesn't take into account the fact that we have radical, non-white activists and scholars who actually don't believe in representational politics, but get subsumed under get cast off as identity politics people, and get cast as race first people, as opposed to really taking the time to actually, if you read the radical scholars, if you read about Paul Robeson, if you read about if
Claudia
you read
Jones.
Walter Rodney, Claudia Jones, all these
Mhm.
people, this is we've always
Mhm.
had a black communists, black socialists, black
Yeah.
black and brown radicals who actually don't break up these two
Yeah.
things, right? And
Yeah.
so then we have to wonder then, aside from Adolf Reed, we have to wonder then, what is it about the whiteness of that critique that allows it to continue popping up? And one way to respond to that critique is to send people to read these radical scholars from the third world, from inside the belly of the beast, the non-white
Mhm.
radical scholars who've, who've done the work of
Yeah.
really mapping out how they work together. And until they do that, we're going to keep spinning our wheels, and we're going to get pulled into um, these mindless discussions
Mhm.
at a time when there's, when we live in a time of monsters, we live
Yeah.
in the time of genocide, and this is the conversation that people want to have.
Yeah. Yeah. And even, thinking about the folks that you mentioned, Jemima, and if you read like General Diop or Ho Chi Minh or Fidel or Che or even the Iranian revolutionaries, the Palestinian revolutionaries, um, Nkrumah, everybody. I mean, there isn't a single national liberation struggle that's been victorious in the third world that mires itself in these ridiculous disaggregations and debates. Not a single one. And that quote that you gave from Mills, I tell my students like a version of that quote, and then I say, but also if the revolution happens, if the socialist revolution happens tomorrow without an analysis of colonialism and imperialism and race, then the day after that, you're still going to have white people and Black people and white supremacy. Alternatively, if you have the victory of the national liberation struggle tomorrow, without class and without addressing capital, you're still going to have the poor and the rich the day after. You can't separate them out. You can't. There's no way. And so I think it's disingenuous. The debates that are happening in the US right now, it's completely disingenuous, and it helps to preserve the supremacy of a particular class of people without truly disrupting either capital or white supremacy, and certainly not US imperialism. Raheem, what do you think?
I think Karina's ready, by the way.
Yeah, I can,
okay.
I can go after her.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Karina, welcome back. Hi, Sarah.
Yeah, I'm going to give you Sarah. This is Sarah Flounders from Workers World. Can you use these, maybe? Sure. Yeah.
Welcome, Sarah.
People to hear Sarah, but can you talk about the relationship between white supremacy and U.S. imperialism and the wars that are happening, and why labor needs to take a stand on these issues?
Well, the oldest union slogan is one struggle, one fight, workers of the world unite. And the role of U.S. imperialism is always to divide, to create hatred, to create racism in its deepest core, to make war on workers around the world. And the role of the union movement must be to defend the workers of the whole world and to defend the most marginalized workers who are under attack right here. It means to take on the issues of ICE and make a real ringing defense. It means to stand for Palestine, to oppose U.S. war in Iran, to defend resistance, Cuba and Venezuela. These issues are deeply linked because it's really the working class that's under attack globally and here. And our unity is what makes a difference. And it's an issue for the union movement, those who fight within the unions and outside, to always bring in the anti-war struggles and the struggles against racism and political repression. Those are workers' issues.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Bye, Karina. Untimely departure. Raheem, what do you think? Oh, and I just want to know, Sarah had an awesome poster that said support the Palestinian resistance, support the Iranian resistance, for those who couldn't see it.
Yeah, totally. Look, I think there are a couple of inheritances that we're dealing with here. There's the inheritance of, the Second International, and how sort of workers, just to piggyback on what Sarah was saying, how workers in Europe chose to, with World War I, chose to, or the European Civil War, as Jimmy was saying, chose to close ranks and go with their sort of national bourgeoisies and their imperialist states, as opposed to thinking sort of more broadly about the decolonization and the national question in the rest of the world. That also carries on into the 50s, at least in the sort of the French Communist Party and its position vis-a-vis the Algerian Revolution and the anti-colonial war, and the fact that they didn't support it because they thought Algerians were still sort of, a nation in formation, and that needs tutelage, and in sort of Millsian 19th century kind of nonage or whatever it's that word that he used, that So they sided with, they thought that these are either distractions. The national question is either a distraction or just a regressive, these are regressive forces, you know. And was it, there's that Aimé Césaire's letter of resignation from the French, letter to Torres, in which he actually lays this out more eloquently than I can ever do. So that you think one thinks that kind of debate was had after the World War One. That debate was had some in the 50s around the Algerian Revolution. But like just a few years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, Joseph Borrell, the chief European diplomat, who was speaking to this is the European Diplomatic Academy in Bruges, Belgium, and he says something to the effect that Europe is a garden and the rest are, you know, the rest of the world is, meaning Africans essentially who are coming there. These are barbarians who are trying to take over. So that kind of thinking is still sort of meets the institutions of power, and I want to just underline and emphasize, this is the chief diplomat. Diplomat, you know, this is the diplomatic language. So if this is the discourse in diplomatic circles, what is the discourse in military circles or intelligence circles? You know, the diplomats are supposed to make whatever, you know, to embellish, not to. But if this is what diplomatic speak is like, it just shows you like the rot is deep, and that's the thinking, that's the approach. To the global South and people of color, or what sort of Trump and his you know, alcoholic war secretary talking about Iran and saying that, oh, these are animals, we can just decimate them, or the stuff that Israeli leadership was saying about Gaza, and these are animals that need, you know, subhuman, that need to be exterminated. This is, you know, it's just, it seems to me disingenuous then to discount race. Like you cannot be taken seriously if you're saying that race has nothing to do with all of this, or just that it's just sort of sort of a superstructure, an ideological superstructure that only justifies the material needs of imperialism. You know, so that's my 2 cents there.
I did want to add quickly, if I can. One of the
ahead,
things that I want us to really remember is it's easy to point to obvious racist acts, right? It's easy to point to Stephen Miller and Trump and so on and so forth. But we can also say we have to think about white supremacy as a system that is embedded in everything, right? It's embedded in the religions, it's embedded in who we cite, it's embedded in what's considered theory, it's what's considered classical music, it's embedded in how we teach our kids, it's embedded in what we consider, developed, and so it is structured. It's in MTV, it's on the shows we watch, it's everything, right? So this is why we can say Barack Obama represented a white supremacist system. This is why why we say that, it includes the corporeal, but it goes beyond the corporeal, right? The skin, it's right. And so we, just everything we think about, what we think is continental theory, for example. What's the continent? Europe, which is not even a continent.
It's not even, it's a peninsula of Asia.
Eurasia, right? And so just basic things like that, world history is what? European history is what our kids learn. We're so inundated by it, right? And down to like the privileging of light skin in predominantly non-white societies, hair texture, color, what we think is good, what good cuisine is. So that's what I wanted to say. Like, it's this structure that was set up through the brutality of colonialism and slavery that then really shapes how we see the world, right? What's a jungle, what isn't? And so beyond the individual, like, public racist pronouncements, our everyday lives are structured through this power. And whiteness is power, which as James Baldwin used to say, right? Or Du Bois would say, whiteness is the ownership of the world forever and ever, amen, right? And so and he said that in the 40s, right? So we have to actually keep that in mind, and I think that's an important thing. And so when we do that, we actually we bypass the race versus class discussion, and really it brings us back to really the material realities that has structured the world in a way that allows this group that is racialized in a particular way to control everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, Nina. Also, like there is a long durée thing, especially when we think about processes of racialization and how, for example, the some of the left or part of the left relates also to say places like Iran, the Islamic Revolution in Iran, and the Islamic Republic, right? And there is a different thread also that that is parallel, which is left idea, that these sort of leftists are apart from sort of this history that we talked about in the 20th century of the Second International and what have you. There is a longer sort of a long durée also tradition of modernity and modernism, and how modernity, European modernity, rejected sort of religion, rejected the Catholic Church, which then stood for religion tout court, and it became, that the sort of any religious ideas are still, these people are still enchanted and still live in a magical world, and these forces cannot sort of be progressive. The only progress that can be achieved is the progress that we see. You can't see anything other than what I can see or what I can show you. And that kind of sort of Islamophobia, like it runs deep, like so people who have trouble being sort of in solidarity with the Islamic Revolution for its anti-imperialism, for its in some ways in sort of being really at the forefront of the fight against imperialism, need to really examine and reflect on these sort of deeper roots to and knee-jerk reactions that are inherited from these different traditions that all relate and go back to sort of the colonial first colonial kinetic contact, if you like.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you for bringing Iran in, Brahim. So you both reminded me of something that was circulating on social media, I think last year, where Angela Merkel was talking to Xi Jinping, or maybe she was reading, or she describes this in her book, where he tells her, for the majority of human existence, the most developed societies in the world were non-white and non-European. This period of white power and the European, development and European imperialism is actually quite short from a historical point of view. It's less than 1,000 years. And right now, what's really, really interesting about this particular moment that we're in, and why this debate came up again, I think, is because now we are on the cusp of another moment, right? When it is the non-white world, the global majority, the 80% of the planet that is not from Europe, that is about to retake control of its own destiny. That's what is happening now. You can call it multipolarity, you can call it third world liberation, whatever you want to call anti-imperialism, but that is what is happening now. And so the fact that this debate shows up in this form at this particular moment within the 20% that's been dominating the planet for a short 500 or 600 years is not an accident, because they want to continue to dominate the planet, and it's looking like they won't be able to. I also want to note that one of our members, Sharice Burden-Stelly, who wrote an excellent book on this topic, sort of on this topic, actually held ground in the debate on social media a lot a couple of weeks ago. And then she did a podcast last Friday that we can circulate, hopefully, in the chat. So maybe we should get to questions now. Is that a good idea, Jemima?
Yeah. No, I said Karina wants to answer that important
Yeah, is it up
question.
yet? Let's put up the question. I think it's a good question. So this is a question from the chat. How will, and I want to answer it as well. I'm from Oklahoma, so I feel like I can answer it. I mean, I'm Iranian, but I'm also from Oklahoma. How will telling poor whites that they are part of a system of racial supremacy achieve class goals? Karina, you take it first, and then I'll speak from the perspective of an Oklahoman. Oh, Karina, your sound is weird. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
It's good. It's good.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Great. Yeah, I was just going to say that, in addition to it just being the right thing to do, right, to recognize white supremacy and that it's incumbent upon people who have benefited from this system, and even some crumbs of it, even if it's not, we were talking about what Gerald Horne said about class compromise, that the working class here has historically entered into that class compromise with a white ruling class. And, I think it's important and necessary to recognize how it's possible white class too. And ultimately, what you were saying, Nina, about the shifts that are happening, firstly, the historical arc, but also the shifts that are happening with the demise of U.S. imperialism, and the reality that the most successful worker struggles have been outside of the West, going back to the Haitian Revolution, and or here have been led by Black and brown and other racialized working class people here. So what W.E.B. Du Bois talked about is, the first general strike here around the abolition of slavery, and the role of people of the enslaved population of rising up against the system of slavery in the same way that people rose up against slavery and colonialism in Haiti. So if people are really interested in winning here, if people are interested in defeating racial capitalism, defeating capitalism, which depends upon white supremacy, which depends upon imperialism, and they need to take the lead of those people who are at the tip of the spear, those people who have been the most oppressed, those people who have been the most exploited, not just because it's the right thing to do, because that's how you win. Because who's leading, who's winning, who's defeating these systems and structures? It's always been in the global South. Again, going back to the Haitian Revolution, going back to the anti-colonial struggles, which were also worker struggles, peasant struggles. And we see that, of course, today with Palestine, with Iran. This is what it's, if people, that the mantra about Palestine will set us free, will liberate us all, it's true with the global majority in general. And it's really crucial for white workers to understand that and to break this class compromise, to be race traders, as Frantz Fanon said, in the meaningful, real sense, and to join this struggle full-heartedly. So, I think that there is some movement on the ground that is happening. I think the fact, again, bringing it back to here where I am right now, the fact that we have so many people out here at an anti-imperialist, anti-racist, anti-ICE contingent of the May Day rally is a sign that, people do understand this increasingly. And, there always has been also a sector of the more radical, going back to the Wobblies as well, more radical forms of labor organizing. That this is a tradition that we can build upon here, and the Black and Arab worker solidarity that came out of Detroit in the 60s as well. These are the traditions that we can build on, the abolitionist movement as well. So I think that's what I would say to that question.
You're on mute, Nina.
I'm so sorry. Sina's gonna yell at me. Thank you so much, Karina. I know it was super hard to do this and while you're at a protest, but we really appreciate you and your interventions were awesome. So I am honored to welcome Peter Hudson. Thank you very much for joining us. I know you had a hectic day. Please introduce yourself. Peter's a preeminent scholar on the things we've been talking about today. Peter, feel free to introduce yourself and just jump right in. You know what the questions are.
Fair enough. Well, first of all, I apologize to everyone for coming on near the end of the show. I did have some familial delays. Everything is okay, but there was delays nonetheless. I wrote a book called Bankers and Empire, How Wall Street Colonized the Caribbean, which was just recently translated into Spanish by Tinta Limon Press in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And that book, I think, in some ways gets to some of the questions that have been posed and responded to over the show. But the first thing I wanted to say, just thinking about the themes for today and thinking about May Day, I think we need to acknowledge, if we already haven't, the huge rallies that are happening in Havana right now. I think there's 50 or 60 or 70,000 people on the Malecon. And it reminds me, I mean, Cuba always reminds me and leads us back, I think, to the work of the great Cuban patriot and apostle Jose Marti. And I think one thing I didn't realize, and this is inside his collection of essays, Inside the Monster, edited by Philip Foner, that Marti was witness to the Haymarket murders and to the execution of the Haymarket martyrs. And so that, when we think about May Day, it brings us back to Marti, it brings us back to his kind of great ethical vision. And I think it links us to a number of questions that have been debated or talked about on the podcast today. First of all, Marti as someone who was deeply committed to not just Cuban working people, to peasants and workers, but to an international grouping of peasants and workers, to Marti's understanding of the role of race in constructing the divisions between Cuban workers, and also Marti's profound and persistent anti-imperialism. Obviously he fought and was killed in the battle against Spanish colonialism, but he was very much aware, dating back to the Inter-American or the Pan-American economic conferences at the end of the 19th century, of the threat of the U.S. to all of the Americas. So I think when we think about May Day and when we think about these questions of race versus class, it's always good to ground us in Marti's writing. And the other thing I want to say, I feel like the whole question race versus class is in some ways misleading. And it's misleading in the sense that we're forced to engage in a debate that has been disproven for over 500 years, where we've seen that since the Haitian Revolution, since 1492, we could argue that race and class have been working together quite handily in a very materialist fashion. And then we're forced in some ways onto the terms of liberals and conservatives who want us to kind of divide the two, where I think in our experiences as people of color, this has never been the case. And I think when we then talked about this term racial capitalism, which is bandied about incessantly and almost meaninglessly, what's important about that term for me, and in terms of the scholars most recently that I've been influenced when it comes to thinking about race and class, especially South African scholars like Bernard Magubane and Neville Alexander, race and class isn't an object. Racial capitalism isn't an object. It isn't a fixed and static identity. Racial capitalism is a methodology for understanding specific historical conjunctures, specific geographical conjunctures as they appear. And if you look at the work of Bernard Magubane specifically, he talks about South Africa in the 1970s and 1980s as the citadel of racial capitalism in Africa. And that's because there's a conjuncture of South Africa, the South African apartheid state, using violence to repress and segregate a Black working class. He's talking about South Africa as a citadel of racial capitalism, also because of South Africa's role as a kind of conduit for empire throughout the continent. And so always when we're thinking about racial capitalism, these questions, we can't divorce it from a question of imperialism. So I hope I haven't gone too far off topic with my belated responses, but thank you for having me on the show.
So we have thank you so much, Peter. We have about 10 minutes left. I want to stick with Peter for a moment, if that's okay. And then we'll do a quick wrap up, and I'll tell you my Oklahoma story. So
I was waiting for that.
So Peter is also a member of the Anti-Imperialist Scholars Collective. So how does the fact that imperialism is the primary contradiction, destroy this so-called debate?
That's a very good question. How does it destroy the debate? Well, I mean, I think when the members of this formation talk about imperialism, there's a sense of imperialism as in some ways an assemblage of materialist practices. And I think we can talk about imperialism around its debates in terms of finance capitalism, emerging out of the 19th century as a kind of break from kind of earlier forms of mercantilism. But with that, and I think Walter Rodney is very good about this when he has an essay in Monthly Review from the early 1970s when he revisits Lenin, and he disputes people who are saying, well, Lenin didn't deal with Africa, Lenin doesn't approach race. Well, he's like, well, Lenin was looking at a very specific formation. And by looking at a specific formation, he's not excluding the possibilities of an understanding of racism or understanding of the kind of geographic expansion of an understanding of imperialism to include Africa. And so I think, you know, if we revisit Rodney, if we revisit other Black and Third World scholars in this, I think that their work on imperialism and on understanding that contradiction shows how it's always entangled, always imbricated, always intertwined. And so if you begin from that premise, it dismisses the kind of naysayers who are like, race is just an appendage, race is just a small kind of tool of the capitalist class, or the kind of unreconstructed Marxists who will dismiss a kind of racial analysis that's tied in with capitalism. That said, I think we also have to acknowledge the danger on the other side, right, of the kind of Cedric Robinsonians who would make the argument that historical materialism isn't important, that there's a metaphysical understanding of racism that persists over time. So I think, you know, and then we see this in its most extreme forms in the kind of Afro-pessimist school, right? And so I think we're kind of navigating this place between the kind of anti-racist fundamentalists, you know, people like Adolf Reed and others whose work is very, very slick, very, very smart, very eloquently written, but leaves you with all these kind of holes where he's basically saying, he's asking you not to consider racism, say in US politics. So there's those people, and there's and then we have the Cedric Robinsons who in my mind are basically saying race is everything all the time, everywhere, and a Marxist analysis doesn't do anything for us.
Thank you, Peter. That was excellent. So I'll just tell you my Oklahoma story. So I am from Oklahoma, though I'm Iranian, and there's a big Iranian population in Oklahoma. I don't live there anymore, though. I'm in New York now. So in 1917, in Oklahoma, there was the Green Corn Rebellion, which was a rural uprising of a coalition of poor whites, Blacks, and indigenous peoples. and they rose up against World War I conscription and the capitalist system. And I believe at one point there was a call to have socialists, their flag become the state flag or something. Maybe it was at one point, I'm not really sure. So the presumption that white people and poor whites are somehow incapable of recognizing that standing with the oppressed peoples of the world is going to harm them is a counter-revolutionary presumption. And as in fact, history has proven that it's not true. There have been poor whites and working class whites that have stood with the working class of the world and united with the world. And the way to get out of this divide and conquer mentality that was created by the Europeans is to read history. It's to read history and teach people of the times when this has actually happened and when this has been possible.
Can
Go
I
ahead,
quickly
Javinia.
add? I do want to answer this question: how telling poor whites they're part of a system of racial supremacy achieve class goals. The other part of white supremacy we have to think about when we say white supremacy rules the world, we're talking about the white control of the world, white control of the the poor whites don't have access
No.
to the power of the rich whites. They do through class collaboration by getting together and having 78 million or 80 million people vote for, Donald Trump or come together when they need to. And that's because the poor from slavery times, the poor whites have collaborated a lot with the white ruling class. Because they think it works for them, and which is why the white ruling class has always gone out of its way to make it seem like their winnings are for all the classes of whites. And so what we have to understand is white supremacy. When we talk about white supremacy, is to say that poor whites are also implicated, but they're also victimized by the white power structure, because it's the white elites, right, that are making all the money, but they're using the poor whites as buffer, right, as to give up their class solidarity with everyone else for this crazy belief that one of these days that these poor whites will make it to the upper echelons of power. So what we have to do is actually explain that white supremacy is really talking about the white upper class with collaboration with the poor whites. And once people who are poor understand that we are all poor together, or we are not part of the elite classes, that we need to have interracial collaboration against white supremacy, then we can see that's the way to move forward. And this is where you'll have class goals of solidarity, because once we destroy the ruling class, it opens up the space for all of us.
Can I add a historical footnote to the comments and to Nina's comment on history? I think there's three people I would encourage people to read if they haven't already. The first is anything by and about John Brown. I mean, when we're talking about whiteness and whites. The second is the work of Theodore Allen on white supremacy, and the independent scholar Jeffrey Perry, I think his name is, has done incredible work kind of keeping his work alive. And the third is the writing, including the biography of Howard Kester. And I think a lot of people might not know Howard Kester, but he was a radical, I think born in Kentucky to coal mining families who became very much a kind of Christian socialist at one point, and then was involved with the Southern Tenants Farmers Union. And what they were trying to do was organize Black people across, Black and white people, Black and white sharecroppers across class lines. And he documented this work, and Kester also worked as an undercover white for the NAACP investigating lynchings in the 1930s. But one of the things that Kester does in a book called Revolt Among the Sharecroppers is he documents the organizing attempts of the Southern Tenants Farmers Union. And I'd like to suggest that that book, which came out, I think, in the middle 30s, is an important a text as C.L.R. James's A History of Pan-African Revolt, or George Padmore's Life and Struggles of Negro Toilers, in terms of its documentation of an interracial peasant and working class movement. And I think he's a really neglected figure, and it's so important to countering the kind of discussions of, again, race and class, and also to show the kind of very progressive role that some whites can have in terms of rejecting their social capital, mobilizing their social capital for radical aims, and rejecting an alliance with the white ruling class.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. Brahim, I want to give you the last comment of the day. No pressure. And I also want to say, make sure to go and donate to the Patreon account of our esteemed producer, Sina Rahmani. East is a podcast. Support him, support Ace. Go to our website, go to his website, and push the like button. Brahim, we're going to end with you.
I think you should give it to Peter. He hasn't had enough time on the podcast, or end it on his previous remark.
No, come on, Brahim. Bring it back to Iran for us and Palestine.
Well, the Iran and Palestine, they need to be seen also as working class struggles, and these are people who refuse to be to bow down to the Epstein class and this sort of satanic, pedophilic, imperialist class. That's the world that they want us to live in. What they want really is, they've said it time and again, total submission. It is time for people across the world to rally around the forces, the actual forces, not the ones that profess to resist imperialism, but the ones who are actually doing it. They're putting their lives on the line, and their homes and their kids on the line. Those are the people who should be in the forefront. Those are the people who should lead it. Those are the people who we should support and stand behind, because they're not only fighting for their sort of livelihoods, but they are really fighting on behalf of all of us, for our humanity. It is them putting their lives on the line so that we remain human.
Thank you so much, Brahim. Karina, are you available for a final word? Can you?
Just wanted to say, sending solidarity from here. It was a really great discussion. And yeah, just to sort of pick up on what was said, there are also loads of examples I came to mind when Peter and Brahim were speaking, from the anti-colonial struggle in Algeria, where you had some French people who joined the anti-colonial struggle in Palestine as well. There's a tradition of race traders, of people who have broken that class compromise. And I think on especially today, International Workers' Day, that it's really important for us to think about labor, organized labor especially, and how we need to move them on these issues to fight racism, to fight structural racism here in the belly of the beast, and that also, as it's manifested in fascism and the fascist attacks on our immigrant communities, and the carceral police state attacks ongoing on Black and Brown and Indigenous communities, and as it's expressed, as Jemima was saying earlier, in terms of white supremacy as U.S. imperialism, and fighting U.S. imperialism and the wars that always harm the global working class. So I'd just like to end on that note too. And thank you so much. I really appreciated this discussion.
Thank you, Karina. I'm so sorry. I think it was rough. You were awesome. Thank you. Thank you all very much. Big thanks to Sina, who almost had a heart attack when he found out Karina was going to be live at a protest. But he's young, so he can handle it. Thanks to our guests. Big thanks to our viewers and our listeners. Join us next week, where Sharice Burden-Stelly, ACE members Sharice Burden-Stelly and Tamanisha John will be hosting a podcast, 3 p.m. Eastern Friday, I believe. keep up the struggle, keep up the fight until victory.
Until victory.